Okay, Georgia's got definitely somebody that I'm paying attention to from here on out in terms of national championship that's going to be in their way. That's Oregon. I mean, I really thought Oregon looked good on Saturday in a way that they have not so far this season. I mean, Illinois is a pretty good team, and they just throttled them. The way, the way that, the way that they beat them made me think that even though Ohio State's got the most. So how do you put this? Ohio State has the best players to combat what Georgia's got in front of them, but there's something a little bit with Ohio State. They're not playing as well as the sum of the parts should be playing. I mean, you got Quinshon Junkins. That guy is a freaking star, and But anyway, they're not quite playing it the way that they're not playing quite the way that they should. Here's the list for the national championship odds going from best to worst as of this morning. Georgia regressed a little bit, going from plus 330 to 360. Then Ohio State at 400, Oregon at 450, Texas at 650, and then you take a very long fall to Penn State, Clemson, Tennessee at 1500. Miami at 1600, Alabama at 1800, and then 2200 for Texas A&M. Look, Texas A&M's quarterback. A lot of people are going to be talking about that coming into this season. They got to go to South Carolina, probably a game that will be tougher for them than they think. Probably the same way I'm trying to describe Georgia, Florida, but no one's going to expect South Carolina to goof around with Texas A&M, and I bet you they do a little bit. Now, I don't think they're going to beat them. They can. Well, I see these odds. So this is exactly right. They can beat them. I'm just going to say that out loud. Texas A&M is a 3.5-point favorite in Columbia. Like, that's a challenging situation for A&M. Now, Carolina's not had much in the way of success against Texas A&M here lately, but there's some really big kind of games this week in the grand scheme of things, okay? You've got, obviously, the headliner is Ohio State, Penn State. You can't trust either of those teams. You cannot trust either of those teams the way they're playing right now. You certainly cannot trust Penn State. I mean, Penn State has not looked solid for a while now. And I think that, now we're entering November. I mean, Georgia, Florida will be in November. And there's just, I wouldn't be shocked if Arkansas beat Ole Miss. We're just at that point where, if you're not playing well, now's the time you get got. And, that goes for Georgia too. Vandy is 6.5-point dog on the road at Oregon. I mean, at Auburn. Oregon's only a 2-touchdown favorite at Michigan. Man, they're going to throttle Michigan if they play the way they did this past week. But now, this is kind of where we're at right now is what I'm trying to say, and I'm not saying it yet. And let me be more direct. Georgia may be the favorite to win the national championship, but there's a group of several schools that are right there, in my view. It's Georgia, then Oregon. Or those two flip-flopping, I don't think would be surprising at all. Those two, Texas, Ohio State. And, when you want to throw Penn State in there, you can. Once you get past the top four, to me, which are Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, and Texas, which I think coming into this thing, we're either just flipping Alabama for Texas or in or out. But it's basically been that group. After that, for me and the betting odds, it's a pretty long fall. I mean, I can't see Penn State. Penn State beating Georgia would be a pretty, non-significant upset. I mean, I don't think Georgia would be a 10-point favorite necessarily. They might be in a neutral, but it's looking to me like Georgia is probably going to play in the SEC championship now, and it's looking to me like. It's looking like it may come down to who wins A&M Texas. I mean, it's looking like it might be that simple. And that would be a very curious, if Georgia were able to go to the SEC championship and play Texas A&M, I think that would be a really good scenario for Georgia. You would be avoiding replaying Tennessee, which I think is almost impossible to do now. Like I don't think Georgia can. Like they both with the loss in the league, it would be just too hard to figure out how. It's not going to happen. And then the only way Texas gets there is if they beat A&M on the road, which is asking a lot too. So that's kind of what it looks like. It's also possible A&M could get to that game. I mean, look, if they both come into it, A&M undefeated and Texas with one loss, obviously if Texas wins the game, they go, and Georgia would go over Texas. But there are some strange scenarios where you can get a bunch of one-loss teams that are tied and Georgia get left out. But that's pretty unlikely on a lot of different levels. So my suspicion is you're looking at Georgia going forward in the SEC championship. To play in the SEC championship, obviously they have to handle business against Ole Miss, Tennessee, and the Gators, but they should. So I think they've got a real great opportunity here. Now, what you don't want to happen is something I explained Friday night, Saturday night, which is you are the SEC champion and you're mandated to play in the Sugar Bowl, and you go there to find LSU. Georgia would still be favored to win that game, but it would be a road game. As the number one team in the country, that would be unfair. Now, they might not be, as the number two team, number one team, whatever. If Oregon wins the Big Ten, right or wrong, they're going to be the one. Now, how does that affect, Georgia? If you win the conference, it doesn't matter. If you don't win the conference, then it makes things trickier because you'd probably be the 5 in that scenario, and then you'd play Oregon. In that scenario, if you get where you're supposed to go, you'd play Oregon in the semifinals because you would have beaten the number 4 seed, who could be Miami, Clemson, BYU, Colorado. I mean, I don't know where they play. I mean, they could play that. That game could get played in Atlanta if you're playing Miami or Clemson. So there are some tricky things that are out there. I mean, I think Ohio State's got to get a little bit better than they are right now for me to think that they're going to take Oregon out again. But we're always prisoner of the moment. But if you look at holistically at this season, we're through 2 months of the season. We've seen Oregon beat Ohio State. It was at home, but we've seen them also struggle at home with Boise and Idaho, both. We've seen Penn State slog along, just not look good, generally speaking. I mean, they should have beaten Wisconsin last night. They did. They covered the line. But if you watch that game, it was just it was not great. If you watch Texas against Vanderbilt, Texas is a good team, and what they went into against Vandy in Nashville, they went on the road in the SEC against a ranked team, and they won by double digits, if I'm not mistaken. They did everything you're supposed to do, and they didn't look good. I mean, there was a lot of that game that didn't look good for Texas, but that's what it's like playing in Nashville. It's not easy at all. The games that, like the way Georgia beat Kentucky last year or Ole Miss last year, the way that Oregon beat the way that Oregon beat Illinois this past week, or those games, there's like 2 of those a year or 3. Typically, there's times when you don't look the way you'd like to look, and it's just what it is. Now, I thought Alabama played their best game probably of the season against Missouri. Missouri didn't have a quarterback, much the same way that it seemed like a few teams did yesterday. I mean, Ole Miss did not look good, man. I mean, there's a difference between what happened with Texas and what happened with Ole Miss. There's a difference between Texas and Alabama. I thought Alabama looked fine. I didn't think it was anything bad or good, but I think it was their best showing in a while. But would you watch Texas and you watch Alabama? That was different than watching, say, Kentucky, but really Ole Miss, or watching Ohio State. I mean, Ohio State should have lost to Nebraska. That's just what should have happened. I'm not sure I can say that Oklahoma should have beat Ole Miss, but it was not a good look at all. And that's just where it's at. And I think for Georgia, if you were watching yesterday, I think their toughest competition is still probably Ohio State. Okay, but I don't know nationally, I'm talking about, but Oregon is better coached. They have a better quarterback, and I think that matters over time. I just don't know if Oregon and Georgia are on opposite sides. There's no guarantee they get together at the end. There really isn't, because there's so much in the way now. I mean, if you're Georgia and you are the one, if you're Georgia and you're the one, that would be the ideal position because you're the quarterfinal that you'd be matching up with in the semifinal would be either probably the Big Ten champion playing the 8th seed in that scenario, something like that. So it wouldn't be, the 5 or you'd be playing, the pod that would have the Big Ten champion, the number 5 seed, which could be, Ohio State or Penn State or even Oregon. I mean, it's a mishmash of things. Being the 2 would not be the end of the world either. And it's possible the 1 is a harder draw because you've got the 5 who might really be the number 3 team in the country. That's the hard part with being the number 1. So I think if you're Georgia, if you're the 2 seed or not the 1, I mean, like, is Oregon going to go 13-0? Because if they go 13-0, they will be the 1 seed. It's just like when Clemson went undefeated, but Alabama was the better team during that couple of year stretch. That's what would be the same thing here. And I don't know that you can say Georgia's better than Oregon. I think they are, but but like when they played like they did yesterday, Oregon, that is what you'll have to play at to beat Oregon. Playing at that level is the only way to beat Georgia's best team. It's probably the only way to play and beat Ohio State's best team. They don't have to play like that to beat Penn State, Alabama. I don't think they got to play like that to play against Texas, to beat Texas. I mean, like Texas, it was fine against Vandy. It wasn't unbelievable. It was fine. And a lot of times when you're getting out of Nashville, that's all you need is fine. Vanderbilt's a better team than people want to say. And I don't know if they'll beat Auburn down there. That's always a snake pit. But they can. Now that they're an underdog, okay. But I mean, the game, obviously Georgia-Florida is the one I'm going to be watching the closest. I mean, that is, and we'll talk more about Georgia-Florida over time. But that Carolina State game, that is a very curious game to me because of, what are we really talking about with A&M? Like, how good are they actually? And when you're running around and nobody can stop you as a quarterback, that's one thing. But I don't know if they're going – I mean, the way Carolina's defense is, it's going to be trickier for them to pull that off than they did against LSU. And the other thing, too, is for the A&M quarterback, you're going to have to throw it more than twice – complete more than two passes, I think it was. I mean, it's just they weren't asking him to throw it. And they threw one big ball, and it mattered. But, you're going to have to – at some stage, you will have to function as a quarterback. And we'll see more of that Saturday. But I think Georgia, Ohio State, probably Oregon and Texas, those are the best 4 teams in the country. I don't care if Penn State is ranked because they haven't lost. They just don't look like these other teams. Thanks for watching.